All right. We are about to talk with LonerBox. I am calling this a debate. I am not sure if it will be more of a debate or a discussion, but the clickbait is debate. So there you go. Just to set the stage, that is not what I need you to see. What is that? So Hasan Piker is talking about Israel. And he's talking about, I think that something came up about Arab people being in Israel's ranks, right? That is true, I believe. I'd be surprised if it weren't. I haven't looked into it personally, but I'm willing to take his word for it. So he's comparing this, and I think that Zionists like to use this as a counter to Zionism is not like anti-Arab or anti-Muslim, right? So let's see what Hasan Piker has to say about that and LonerBox's response. I think Hasan Piker is basically just saying, well, there were also Jews in the ranks of the Nazis. I believe that's the point that he's driving at, but I will let him speak for himself. I just have a couple of critiques as to what LonerBox is saying here. Like I said, all this is just to set the stage.
Yeah, still doesn't matter. I mean, there was Jews that worked within the Nazi government command structure as well. It's just like
no, there weren't. You lying pseudo.
So yeah, there were. I'm pretty sure. First of all, but keep
intellectual frat. What are you talking? There were Jews at the higher level of the Nazi government. What? This is the problem, man. This is the problem with comparing everything to... He's watered down what Nazism means. No, the Nazis had a policy where you actually had to prove that you were an Aryan to get into the party. You had to be an Aryan. Maybe he's referring to like the couple of people, the couple of officials who rumors would spread around them saying that they were... that they had like one Jewish grandparent or something. That happened to a couple of people, but those people, if it emerged that they had a Jewish grandparent, they were in trouble, right? Stop doing this. Stop. I don't know why. He doesn't care about World War II or the Holocaust or anything like that. He doesn't care about it. Stop using history as this. I don't know why, like to him, I guess, because he brings up the Holocaust more often than most people I know. I hope he gets this message. Because I would hate to see the day if he ends up doing more of these adversarial conversations and he debates like Yosef Haddad, and Yosef Haddad does his old we had an Arab judge, how can we be apartheid when an Arab judge sentenced a Jewish prime minister to prison, an Arab judge, and then Hasan's gonna be like, well, who cares? You know, there were Jews at the highest levels of the judiciary of the Nazi government.
But that's literally true. Not highest levels necessarily, but like that's literally true. Like you can be an Arab judge and a Zionist. You can do both.
Sentencing Nazis for crime. No, they're fucking weren't. You stupid.
I'll pull you on in just a second.
It's not even niche Nazi history, okay? It's called the Nuremberg Laws. Even before the Nuremberg Laws, but these are the ones everyone knows about, right? Look, this is quick. It's quick. You can go to a nice little website here that puts in big, boggly writing, big, googly font. It's almost like Comic Sans because of how easy it is to read this shit. Jews could not do anything of important in the Third Reich. They couldn't do shit. Couldn't even be citizens, let alone in the higher levels of the Nazi government structure.
Okay, so we've got the context now. LonerBox is here. We are going to pull him in, and we are going to just have a chat. Hello?
Hello? Hi.
Hey, how's it going, LonerBox?
Oh, fine. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Alrighty, so let's just cut right to brass tacks. From what I know of you, you do pretty good work. I know that you're like, pro-trans, mostly progressive. We agree on most things, I would imagine. So I do have a lot of respect for you and the work that you do, and I think that most of it's good. So I want to go into this discussion understanding that it's going to be... I'm coming from as good faith a place as possible. I'm just trying to figure out where you're coming from with specifically, I guess, the thing that I called you out for. So with that in mind, I did go over the context with my audience already. I have trouble streaming on Discord at the same time that I live stream just because my computer sucks. But I don't know if you need to go over that with your audience or anything, or do they already know?
No, they'll know. They're fine.
Okay, cool. So it was a tweet from Stardust about you. And my understanding is the context is Hasan Piker was talking about Arab judges in Israel, right? Like there are Arab judges that exist in Israel, correct?
Yeah, but he wasn't talking about that. That was an example I brought up.
That's an example you brought up. Okay, got it. So Hasan Piker was talking, I know for a fact that he was talking about Jews in the command structure of Nazi Germany, correct? Okay. And where did that come from?
He was talking about the rise of fascism and particularly Reform UK, the British anti-immigration party. And they were trying to pose to him, and I think he described them as like palingenetic ultranationalism, which is not really what Reform UK are, but in any case, he was likening them to fascists and Nazis, and their argument back to him was if their main focus is Islam, how did they have a Muslim chairman? And then Hasan's response was, doesn't matter. There were Jews in the Nazi, I think his exact words were, government command structure. And then I thought that was silly. And he was also just spending like most of that conversation equivocating on like Nazi liberal history, which is just something I've had an issue with for a while.
Who exactly was he likening to fascists and Nazis? I missed that part.
Reform UK. You know the party in the UK that Nigel Farage leads? I don't know if you know UK that well.
I do not know UK that well. You'll have to educate me a little bit. I'm sorry.
They're like, right-wing, very free market, very anti-immigration party. Most of their campaign is drummed up off of fear-mongering about small boats, and they are possibly quite likely set to win the next election for the first time. They were also behind Brexit, us leaving the European Union. Same people.
Okay, so they were behind Brexit. Got it. Okay. So he was talking about them and likening them to fascists and Nazis, and you disagree with that characterization, correct?
I don't mind likening them to fascists. I just thought him trying to invoke the Nazi comparison was just not very helpful because Nazi policy on Jews from the very beginning, even before they had power, was very different to how Reform has policy on any race or group like Muslims.
Interesting. So I completely understood this. I thought this was about Israel and Palestine. My mistake. Okay. So
I can do that too if you want.
Yeah, if you want. It's, it's all good. Okay. So you didn't like the comparison then. But in my opinion, right, from what I've seen, what he said wasn't wrong. Like there were Jews in the Nazi command structure, were there not?
So there were like maybe just under 24 of them with either Jewish mothers or like one Jewish grandparent, in some cases, who were in the military. In terms of government, I tend to see government and military as kind of separate. Like if I'm reading in the press and I see a government source said this, I'm probably not assuming that person's a general. And the people we're talking about in the Nazi military who would have passed the Mischlinge Nazi definition of Jew because of them having Jewish ancestry, however loose, was usually a cause for concern. Some people, you were more likely than not just kicked out for that, and they eventually did purge all of them or as many as possible from the Wehrmacht. And as far as the generals go, these people only existed in the military insofar as the Nazi government was willing to make very special exemptions for them. Literally, Hermann Goering's quote was, he didn't say, I think these Jews can stay in the military. He said, I will decide who is a Jew in the military, as in we're just going to call them Aryans and just forget about it. Because these people were not raised Jewish. I think some of them didn't even know they were Jewish, so it was discovered later. Some of them lied. The ones who told the truth were just Jewish, like basically only in name. Their parents didn't see themselves as Jews. They didn't see themselves as Jews. Some people had conversions from their family even before they joined the party. Yeah, I think likening that to Reform UK's structure is just like ridiculous.
Okay. So there are Arabs in Reform UK structure, even though it is fundamentally anti-Arab, right?
Like their party chairman was a Muslim, yeah.
Party chairman was a Muslim. Okay, I see. So Reform UK was Muslim. So basically what you're trying to say is, I feel like you're both correct here. Because I feel like what Hasan's trying to say, if you're being charitable, is there were Jews who helped lead Nazi Germany to its conclusion, or to its highest point, right? And there are people within a Islamophobic structure who are Muslim who are helping lead that group of people to its highest point, even including Islamophobia, right? Like all he's trying to get at is there are people in the structure who, I guess for lack of better terms, are traitors, right, to their group of people. And what you're trying to say is, well, there weren't anybody in Nazi Germany who was nearly as high up as the party chairman is right now. Is that what you're trying to say?
You're not even close, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it just seems like there was like, from what I was looking at, it just seemed like you were being pretty uncharitable to Hasan. Because I see what he's trying to say, don't you?
I see what he's trying to say. And if it were just that in isolation, then I probably wouldn't have had much of an issue with it. And again, that wasn't my clip to publish. That was someone else's. As far as the overall issue was, though, in the context of that conversation, was Hasan doing something that I think he and quite a lot of people who are far left do, is basically manipulating or exaggerating or lying or misleading about history, especially around fascism and Nazis, to get their own way politically in the present day. And I think in the context of him doing that, I think he constantly, him and many others will constantly just either downplay, however accidentally, or will just massage facts about the past to serve themselves in the present. And I can give you examples if you want, but he was doing that throughout the whole conversation. So as soon as he reached the point of saying that there were Jews in the Nazi government command structure, I was just like, okay, that was just where the outburst took place.
Right, but on its face, what he's saying is true. So I guess, like, okay, so he's manipulating, lying, deceiving about fascism and Nazis to get his own way politically, right? So what is that way that you're speaking of? Like, what is it that he wants?
Well, to be clear, just to be clear, in no other time are people going to consider a general who's being given special exemptions from the government as part of the government. Like, I don't think people never do this. Like, would you, if you were reading the press and you saw a government official said X, are you thinking this might be like a general or an officer?
Not necessarily, just a government official. Like, if it says a government official, I don't, like, it could be anybody from a mayor to the president.
Yeah, usually it's the political head. And that's why I think the distinction matters, because these military people only got to stay in their roles through exemptions that were granted by government. Couldn't happen the other way around. They couldn't exempt themselves.
I just feel like that's getting into the weeds a little bit, because the point that Hasan's driving at is you can be Arab in an anti-Arab structure, right? And I agree with that.
Yeah, I get
Do
that
you agree
point.
with that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. If you just, again, if that was the overall community, like, I'm not having an issue with the overall point there. That was just, like I said, in the broader context of him and other people like him in general, just like contorting the facts of history to prove their points. It was just kind of annoying.
But what was he contorting? Because I don't see him contorting anything. Like, what he said was factually correct.
First of all, it wasn't factually correct. And you can even look at his stream afterwards when he was defending this point. He didn't even seem to know about these, like, 3 generals, because everyone else below them was like officers or maybe like 1 admiral. He didn't even seem to know. When he was defending his point on his stream, he was off the top of his head coming up with examples before people started sending him links. And the only example he could come off before people gave him links was capos. Would you say capos are part of government command structure? Is that even humorable? Capos were usually Jews who would either be coerced into giving up other Jews and like disclosing where they were hiding, or being in charge of concentration camps, like being guards and stuff like that.
So they were traitors.
Yeah. Or sometimes, well, I mean, I don't know how much you can call you a traitor if you're being forced to do it for fear of death, but yeah.
Sure, but
some of them were traitors, some of them I think were coerced.
They gave up, like, they were Jews who gave up other Jews for whatever reason. So,
yeah.
So your question then to me is, would I call capos part of the command structure? I think you technically could. Like, they were part of the system through which Nazi Germany accomplished its goals, correct?
That is not part of the government command structure. Like,
they were
someone
grunts.
who's not even in the military, or they're not even grunts. They're not even. They were closer
grunts.
to slaves. Are slaves part of the slavery command structure? Like,
well, if you you ever heard of a house slave? You know what a house slave is, right?
Yeah, I don't think a house slave is part of the slavery command structure.
They absolutely could be, because if you have a house slave and you put them in charge of other slaves, they have now become part of the command structure.
Okay. I suppose if we're... Okay, no. I'm trying not to be cheeky, but yeah, if we're changing the meanings of all the words, and especially given that he's saying this in response to being told about the chairman of a party.
Okay, I understand what you're getting at, and I understand your problem. It just feels like you could have communicated this in a less aggressive way. Like, it just feels like there's something personal that you have against Hasan. That's what I'm getting from this.
I mean, he's triggering sometimes because he's full of shit, but yeah. I mean, yeah, sometimes I do that on stream. Yeah, sometimes I'll get a bit hyper. But like I said, the context of him doing that in that particular video, which is long, I mean, I don't blame you for not watching all of it, is this constant massaging of historical truths about fascism to try and sell a message that is just false. Like, that's kind of where I was coming from with him bringing that up. That was just like the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of raising my voice on a stream.
Sure. What's the message that he's trying to get across that you don't agree with? Like, if you already said it, I'm sorry. I'm just
okay. To put it I didn't. It's okay. To put it the most broadly, this idea that he was pushing throughout, which was that, you ever heard the phrase "scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds"? This idea that liberals, and usually when they talk about it more specifically, this can even mean liberals to the point of social democrats, are basically willing to side with fascists to stop the fear of socialism. And it's like a trend. You know that whole sentiment?
Yes. And I largely think that that's true. I think that liberals often do side with fascism.
Is it true in, well, the example that was being given up there was in Germany. Do you think that was the case there? When I say liberal, I mean like social democrat liberal. I mean, I don't mean like a liberal of 1900 who is like, would easily be a conservative today. Not like that.
So you're asking me if we can fairly compare Jews during Nazi Germany who sided with the Nazis to liberals today who side with fascists?
Not necessarily Jews. It could be social democrats, like center-left liberals.
I think it gets a little bit more complicated. There's a lot of moving parts to that because there were people back then who were trying to self-preserve. You know, obviously I'm sure there were like self-hating Jews or self-hating gay people who were part of the command structure or like suppressed their gayness or, you know, like, and with liberals, it's more about, I think, the capitalist incentive, right? Like they're trying to protect their, you know, their money interests, I guess. So it's different, but both of them are basically like foregoing certain progressive values in order to side with a fascist regime. I think that's, I don't know, that's kind of hard to wrap my head around, to be honest. So I'm not sure. I mean, I can see the comparison.
I would probably argue when it came to Nazis, I think the communists actually did more to help Nazis than the social democrats did.
Really?
Easily. Yeah. 100%.
Okay. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not a history buff, so I don't know. The only reason we're having this conversation is because I just felt like you were being a little unfair to Hasan, a little uncharitable. I guess I don't like I said, it just feels like you don't like Hasan. So like, what don't you like about him? Like it feels like what Hasan's project is to push for a more progressive society, like push closer to socialism, right? Is that something you want?
Socialism and what? Meaning what? I feel like the definition changes depending on which socialist you're talking to.
Well, it's workers owning the means of production, basically.
Via what, like co-ops, the state?
Well, co-ops is how it starts, but it's basically just that if you are like, you don't rent out equipment to work, like for people to work with anymore. Like the workers, like if you work at a restaurant, the workers all collectively own that restaurant, share the profits, or share the income.
I'm in
But
favor
kind of like co-ops,
of,
yeah.
I'm in favor of worker co-ops developing at a rate that is feasible, like to a degree where like some policies that I would back would be something like right of first refusal for companies that need government assistance and them offering the option for workers to take it over, or like the Italian Marcora system where people who are unemployed can lump sum their benefits with another group of people to start their own co-op, or just like preferential loans from governments. I believe in that kind of thing, and I'm also all for encouraging their growth because I think it's a good way to do business. I don't necessarily follow people like Hasan when it becomes a slightly more vague notion, or like simping for the system in China and the CCP, or expecting this to happen through any kind of like through revolution or a forced change. I don't think that's particularly useful.
Sure, I'm not a proponent of revolution either. I don't think it's necessary. But you know, I am on board with moving toward socialism and moving toward like worker-owned means of production. I just think that if like there's an inherent pushback between workers and bosses, right? Bosses try to get workers to work as much as possible for as little money as possible. Workers try to work as little as possible for as much money as possible. There's inherent conflict. And so what I would like to do, and what Hasan I think is trying to do as well, is break down that inherent conflict, because all it does is waste time and effort and money, right? And so if those two competing factions could just get over that difference of like trying to make more money for themselves at the expense of the other, then they could all make a lot more together. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of work environment that I would like to see evolve. And I think Hasan's pushing for the same thing.
Okay, first of all, if you're just talking about like a gradual development of these ways of doing business, that's fine. And they can have their own problems that emerge as well. Like if a co-op seems to get to any particular size, it seems that you run into an issue where they become quite similar to corporations, except that the class antagonism becomes more between workers and managers, and there becomes an alienation between the workers and the people who actually are in charge of general direction of the company. I can talk about like a bit more detail above Mondragon if you want, but no, I don't actually think that's what people like Hasan are pushing for. That's not the kind of that's not what I've seen for the last 2 years. I see a lot of historical inaccuracies and trying to sort of like massage and sanitize the history of the Soviet Union and of Mao's China. And I also just see a lot of incoherent foreign policy around the Middle East, which has not much at all to do with socialism.
Well, I've seen Hasan criticize China before. So, like, he's not in love with the way China is currently. I think he's just trying to say there are things that China does better than the United States. One thing that I like that he brings up a lot is high-speed rail. You know, China has it, we don't. I think that China, in that respect, does better than the United States. I think that's true.
High-speed rail is, to be clear, probably the only example that he gives, right?
Fair. I'm not sure if I can think of another off the dome, but
yeah.
I think,
and again, they have a growing high-speed rail in Spain. There's a slightly smaller one in France. There's one in Japan. It's like I don't really know if that is worth all of the downsides of the system in China under the CCP. But no, I mean it's not just that, right? It's also fawning over getting Chairman Mao's little red book, and obviously. I don't know if you follow much of the discourse around people going to different countries, but the irony of the fact that so many people accused me of doing a propaganda tour in Israel when I think everything I saw from China was like the epitome of a propaganda tour. But I don't know how you feel about either of those.
What kind of world do you think Hasan Piker wants?
I don't think he knows. I think he wants a world where he has more money and clout. I don't think anything else really matters.
So in his mind,
and maybe
in his
one
heart
where
of
Israel's
hearts,
destroyed by the by.
In his why? Let's go there. Let's go there because it's in my title, so we might as well. Why does he want Israel destroyed? Does he just like destruction?
No, it's because he doesn't know anything about the conflict, or he knows a bunch of things about the conflict that aren't true, and has this weird fantasy that somehow getting rid of Israel will be followed only by nothing other than a shared democracy between the two people in the region.
So he doesn't know anything about the conflict. I see him looking at stuff all the time about the conflict. I see him looking at videos from it. I see him looking at Benjamin Netanyahu's speeches. I see he looks at stuff all the time about Israel and Palestine, honestly, to a degree that I found it every time I would tune into him, he was looking at something new about Israel and Palestine. So it seems like he's educating himself quite a bit on it, don't you think?
That's what I said. You can knowing nothing versus you knowing a lot of things that aren't true. But I mean, if you've watched what he's watched, then I guess that would make you confident in talking about it, right?
Say that again.
If you've watched him learning on his stream enough, then would that make you fairly confident on talking about Israel Palestine?
I'm confident on talking about anything. If I don't know something, I'll just look it up. But
okay, maybe just to streamline this, I can maybe give you like a couple of headings, and you can choose which one you want to talk about because we've kind of covered like 3 things now. One can be, I think it's a total myth to say that there's anything special about like liberals or social democrats to make them support fascists, and that I actually think communists did a lot more to help the Nazis than social democrats did. That's one. 2, we could talk about the CCP and Chinese communism and whether that's worth pursuing. And I guess 3 could be about whether or not destroying Israel is a good idea.
Let's talk about 3. That's the one I got in my title. Yeah? So okay. So you think Hasan wants to destroy Israel? What do you think he means by that?
Probably some very vague allusion to the state dissolving and it becoming a South Africa-style democracy with Arabs and Jews living equally as equal citizens, and them both consenting to this.
Okay, so he wants the Israel state to dissolve, and he wants like the people who are being subjugated to have like equal rights and say over what happens in that society as the people who are not being subjugated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So I fail to see how that's a bad thing.
Does it bother you that neither side in that region wants this?
I think Palestinians do want that. They want to be seen as equal citizens.
Can you show me that?
Well, I think anybody would want that. Like what they want essentially is to be able to live in their homes without being worried about being dragged out of them, right? Like we've seen that happen. The IDF has done that. So I think that it is reasonable to not want that to happen to you. Right?
No, of course they don't want to they don't want to be physically or materially harmed. That's obvious, okay?
Right.
But as a popular lefty slogan goes, people don't just want peace, they also want justice. I have not seen any evidence that Palestinians think a one-state solution with equal rights for both groups is justice in their eyes, unless you can show me something different. As far as I know, the one-state solution with equal rights is actually the least popular solution for both groups.
Do you think that's what Hasan wants? A one-state solution with equal rights for both groups?
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that that's kind of problematic to want it when the Palestinians are the ones who don't seem to want it.
Maybe that's a point of contention that he might have with Palestinians. I don't know. Right now, Palestinians are very angry and very hurt because, frankly, they're starving and children are being dismembered and dying. Like, in that situation, I might also want vengeance or some kind of justice. Like, that's a pretty horrific scenario, don't you think?
Yeah, they've wanted that vengeance or justice before October 7th, obviously.
Sure.
Even before 48, they've kind of wanted, that's been the more popular thing, is that kind of justice. But yeah, again, but that's why I'm wondering, is it not a problem when one of the like big left-wing thought leaders, or the biggest in terms of streaming on this issue, is like pushing for a position that, as far as anything beyond just saying one state, two people, equal rights, there's not really any, as far as I've seen, any feasible blueprint for this. There's no Palestinian popular major leader calling for this. And Palestinians, when they are asked, they don't want it. I can show you, I can find a poll from 2024 where they're asked, and they're given all the options. They're given two states, one democratic state, or one undemocratic state, or one state without equal rights. And it seems to be that the democratic state is the least popular. The last poll I saw from it got 8% in Palestinians. So I don't understand why you'd be pushing for something that they don't want.
Because he wants it. Because he sees that that is the solution. Even if, like, let's put it this way. Palestinians in Palestine, trans and gay rights are not very good, right? Like, they don't really recognize, to say the least, they don't recognize gay marriage, at least. I've heard of stonings on the streets. I don't know the truth of that. But we can both agree, probably. Sure, we can both agree that trans and gay rights in Palestine is not great, right? So, that being the case, Hasan still wants trans and gay rights. Like, he even wants it in Palestine. So on that point, he might have some contention with a lot of the Palestinians. But ultimately, it's not necessarily about what any individual or group of Palestinians want. It's about what is going to be best for all parties involved. And Hasan thinks that that is with a one-state solution where they live in a democracy and everybody has equal say. One person, one vote, right?
Yeah, but the question is the difference between gay and trans rights and what the state solution should be is that the whole point about emancipation for any group, any national group or any oppressed group is about self-determination. So I think when it comes to trans rights and things like that, you can say that we can oppose them if they have their state and they don't give trans rights, but that's a question of that's their self-determination, which is what people advocate for. So if we're talking, but it's different when we're talking about one or two state solution, because that is a question of the very basis of their self-determination. But I don't know why you would go for a self-determination that they don't want. So what's the point in saying self-determination if you want them to have the form of state that they don't want, to share the country with people they don't want to share it with, to live in borders that they don't see to want with the current government arrangements? Why any of that? That's the basis of the self-determination.
Well, let's start with this. Do you think that Israel should pull out of Palestine?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good start. So, like, you and Hasan agree on that,
probably
right?
for a very different, well, probably in a very different way that you or Hasan would say, yeah. Probably
But you
in a very
agree on
different,
that. You think that Israel is invading Palestine and should pull out, correct?
Yeah, but I'm not going to,
Okay.
again, the word invading is probably going to be contentious, but in terms of how and when and why, on what conditions they do that, we're going to disagree, yeah.
Fine.
I don't think they should do it like unilaterally.
But even when I bring up something that you and Hasan agree on, you're so quick to jump to a disagreement. You're like, boom, you don't get it.
Yeah,
Me and Hasan is different.
But that's because the disagreements are much more substantial than you seem to think they are.
But okay, you want good things, right?
Everyone wants what they think are good things. Yeah.
You're an enjoyer of things that you think are good, right? Right? Everybody is an enjoyer of things that they think are good, right? So, on that level, you agree with everybody. You all want good things. Everybody wants good things to happen. So I like to start, this is my new philosophy. I like to start there and work my way up to the most common ground that I can possibly reach with people and see if we can make things work from there. You and Hasan both want Israel out of Palestine, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great. So let's talk about the differences then. What does Hasan want Israel to do that you don't want Israel to do?
It sounds like, well, he wants Israel to leave unilaterally and to also dissolve their own government right after they've left and to make themselves equal citizens with Palestinians in the entire territory and to turn it into one country.
I think they should be equal citizens. And I think it should be one country.
Okay.
Why not?
Why do you think let's try the obvious one. Why do you think Palestinians don't want that?
Well, because they see Israelis as like oppressors, and they don't want to live with their oppressors.
Did Black South Africans say that? They had a leader who pushed for equal rights.
I don't know. I don't know much about South Africa. I mean, it's possible. Like people generally don't want to live with people that they perceive as oppressors, but Israeli citizens are just that. They're just citizens. You know, even if they believe in the Israeli project, I think the statistics is like 90-something% of them believe in the Israeli project, the Zionist project.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, they're still just citizens. Most of them aren't really doing anything wrong, right? They're just chilling. They're just living their lives. They don't want to hurt anybody. If they saw a Palestinian somewhere, they wouldn't like chuck rocks at them. They would just let it go, you know, like, and that's how most Israeli people are. And so but Palestinians don't see it that way because they've been bombarded by Israel for a very long time. So there's a lot of deprogramming to do here on both sides, you know, but we should recognize that it is largely Israel that's at fault for this. I think that's important to recognize.
Okay, we can get into that if you want. There's a few different, there's like a crossroads. So if we're talking about why Palestinians don't want to have an equal state with equal rights for both groups across the whole territory, and Israelis don't want it, why does turning it into one state, what problem gets solved by that if neither of them want it?
Eventually, you just learn to coexist, right? Like, take cities, for instance, like just the city environment, like New York City. You know, you have people from all different backgrounds, all different shades, like just vibing and chilling together. You have Muslims living next to Jews. You have mosques next to temples, right? And they're fine, and they get along for the most part. Now there is some conflict, but for the most part they coexist peacefully there. So integration.
Yeah, and then you have other countries where different ethnic groups are thrown together through imperial powers that didn't have their best interests at play. And in some cases, that wasn't always the answer, though, was it? So with India and Pakistan, they didn't say, "Well, fuck this, let's just come together in one country." They partitioned, and then that was very violent. Some countries stayed together and tried to build a country, like Syria, and then they had a civil war that killed over 500,000 people. Lebanon has just been in a state of constant ebbing and flowing of instability for God knows how long. Sudan, same thing. So Yugoslavia. That's the thing I don't get is why someone in the West decides that they're going to choose what the answer should be over there when the people there do not want it. And they still want self-determination. When you ask Palestinians, do you want one state, two states, or an unequal two states, that by far it's two states that wins out. So I don't know why people get to a point where they disparage at even wanting that, because they consider that, oh, that's just like you've stolen 3/4 of the land then, and then they only keep 1/4. But again, if that's the solution that seems to be the more popular one for them, I don't know why people would be against that. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, like you said, self-determination is important. So if the war ends tomorrow over there and Palestine decides, like the people of Palestine decide, we are going to live in our section of this land and call it Palestine, and Israel will live over there, and it's a two-state solution, there's not much we can do about it. That's their decision. That's self-determination. At the same time, I think more integration is always better. So if you can convince more people that integration is the answer, that's going to be better. So first, the fighting has to stop, and then people can start to understand that most Israelis are not generally bad people, and you can live next to each other and exist next to each other just fine. You know, and we did that in the United States during the Civil Rights era. You know, we kind of forced we forced integration.
Yeah.
What's the famous picture of the little girl walking into a white school? I can't remember her name. A very famous picture. And people didn't like it. But we said, listen, there's going to be some growing pains, but integration is important. You know, we have to make people understand that there's nothing wrong with existing next to each other. It's called coexisting.
Yeah. The problem is that, first of all, if you support coexistence, why would you support Hezbollah, Houthis, and Hamas?
I don't know anything about Hezbollah or Houthis or what they do. As far as Hamas...
Is that not important to the conflict? If you've watched Hasan and learned stuff from him, he talks about Houthis quite a lot.
I learn things. I learn things as I go. I'm not a big history buff or foreign policy buff, and I'm doing my best to get better about it. So I apologize if we have to educate on some things. It slows down the conversation. I get it, but I'm doing my best. As far as Hamas goes, since that's the one I know about, no, I don't agree with everything they do. I think that they're largely a violent group. right? That doesn't, but when I don't support Hamas, quote unquote, but I do understand why Hamas is like the group over there. They're the resistance group. They are the resistance group, period. So
Resistance to what? What are they resisting?
The IDF, the invasion of Israel.
And okay, we probably do need to do history.
Okay.
When Hamas calls themselves, okay, first of all, if I just say when Hamas says that they are resisting, they're not talking about resisting occupation or blockade of Gaza and the West Bank. When they talk about resisting, they're talking about resisting the existence of Israel. They think that Jewish people in historic Palestine, whether it's in Israel, Gaza, or the West Bank, they think that they are invaders, they're interlopers, and they should basically just be terrorized until they get bored of the Zionist project and leave. That's what Hamas wants.
You said when Israel comes into like places like the West Bank, like they just see them as invaders and they harass them and terrorize them until they leave?
Hamas sees their existence anywhere from the river to the sea as an invasion. They see their existence in Tel Aviv as an invasion.
Okay, and they could be, misguided to some extent. They're not a peace-loving group, and that's why I don't say that I support them. But ultimately, they're not the ones with the levers of power. Israel is. The IDF is. So if anybody here is responsible for de-escalating the situation, it's not Hamas. I think that's the point that Hasan tries to get across.
Yeah, and I think that's misguided. I think Hamas has a lot more agency over where this conflict goes and what direction it can take than people give them credit for. We know this because do you know the timeline of Israel and Gaza and Hamas coming to power?
I've learned about it a little bit. I know that Hamas was basically elected into office, but if I understand correctly, it's also such that Israel made it so that they're the only group there that has any kind of power at all, right? Like Israel pulled the strings such that Hamas was the group in power. Is that incorrect?
Not aware of this. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't think Israel pulled any strings. I mean, the only string pulling that happened was that Hamas wins the election. They don't win an outright majority. There's supposed to be a unity government between them and Fatah. The West does not like Hamas being there at all because they're the ones who have done all the suicide bombings of the last 5 years. And Fatah, with I think maybe nation support from the United States, decides that they're going to try and take over the government away from Hamas. Hamas is not really playing ball with wanting to be part of a unity government because it would mean you recognizing Israel, which they don't want to do. And there's effectively a war between the two of them, and Hamas wins in Gaza. And so Fatah, the other party, is basically gone. They get thrown off rooftops, they get chased out, the other ones go into hiding, or they capitulate and join Hamas, or they just go neutral. That's what happened in Gaza. Hamas took it over. They took it over in a civil war or a coup.
Okay.
After Israel had pulled out. So Israel wasn't pulling strings to make that happen.
So,
they didn't want that to happen.
Fine, sure. So Fatah was there first. Fatah wanted to recognize Israel, but Fatah got muscled out by Hamas, who didn't. Is that a good summary? Okay.
More or less, yeah.
Okay, so it seems like Hamas simply had the bigger guns, more power, and and more support, frankly, from the people, if I had to guess, and just shoved Fatah out, right?
In Gaza, they did, yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like then the Palestinians are very angry, right, about something. They're so angry, in fact, that they don't want to even recognize Israel as a state. Why do you think, what could have possibly transpired to have made them so angry as to put Hamas, a violent group, in power such that they basically want to destroy Israel? That didn't come from nowhere.
You tell me. Yeah, I know it didn't come from nowhere. And if we're going to and again, I'm generally one of the first ones to make the argument that, yeah, like Zionism, for as much as I might disagree with far leftists on why it exists and what are the morality of it, the fact is that it did entail going to a land where people already lived, and then the Zionists obviously took quite a bit of that land. We can talk about all the steps in between if you want, but there comes a point when you realize that this is we're something like 60, 70 years past it now, and at this point, I can understand why Palestinians feel the way they do. I can't understand why a Westerner who claims to be left-wing would still believe that trying to destroy Israel by force is a justifiable or understandable or reasonable desire. I don't think it has ever helped Palestinians. I don't think it has ever gotten them any closer to getting the freedom and peace and security that they want. If anything, it's only made their lives worse. Do you agree with or disagree with any of that?
I think that violent rhetoric is pretty much always bad. I think that trying to come together is always better, but I think that recognizing the source of the separation and of the violence and of the anger, especially of the oppressed group when it's coming from them, is very important. Because what you're basically doing is you're shifting focus over to the oppressed group and forcing responsibility onto them that, frankly, like, they're not willing to listen to. Like, even if what you're saying is correct, you're not convincing anybody. You know, like, they're not ready to hear that. What would make them ready to hear that is, first and foremost, if Israel pulls out of Palestine, which you've said that you want. So they need to do that first.
So the question is then, well, Israel pulled their military and their governance out of Gaza in 2005. They had settlers there. They literally went there and forced those settlers, 8,000 or 9,000 of them, to leave Gaza. They pulled their military out around the border, and then they pulled any administrative structures. They left as well. They left Gaza in 2005, and between 2005 and 2007, Hamas they win the election, and then they seize power in Gaza. That's so. If Israel left Gaza, they actually did in Gaza. They did what you want. They left.
Okay.
So I don't understand. So is that not an important part of like the timeline and the context? The fact that Israel left Gaza, and the fact that when they left, Hamas took over and decided, no, we're going to use this breathing space that we've been given. We're going to use this territory, and Gaza gets quite a bit of international humanitarian aid, and we're going to use this not to build something like build a parallel society and to build peace and security or whatever else. We're just going to build rockets and try to go further. We're going to use this breathing space to hit Israel harder, and they did.
Okay, so it was. I'm reading up on it right now on Wikipedia. Proposed by Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon in 2003. Let's see. They pulled out of Gaza. The IDF began evicting all Israeli settlers who were refusing to accept government compensation packages in exchange for voluntarily vacating their homes in the Gaza Strip. Well, this sounds good to me. By September 12th, all Israeli residential buildings in the territory had been demolished, and the 8,000 plus Israeli settlers who inhabited them had been removed. The dismantling of the 4 West Bank settlements was completed 10 days later. The disengagement was executed unilaterally by Israel and without coordination with the Palestinian National Authority. Yet among Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, the disengagement was met positively in light of earlier skepticism surrounding Israel's intention to withdraw from the territory. Among Israelis, polls showed support for the disengagement in the 50 to 60% range and opposition in the 30 to 40% range. The IDF met heavy resistance and riots while conducting evictions throughout the Gaza Strip settlements. Former and future Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu resigned from Sharon's government in protest. Okay. The Gaza Strip disengagement occurred 7 months after the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, which ended the second intifada. As part of this process, 4 Israeli settlements in the West Bank were dismantled as well. Okay, I'm just trying to see what so the Palestinians seem to like that then. 50 to 60% of them supported that. So why then would they have elected Hamas? That's a good question.
Mostly because of corruption. But also because I think I think after the second intifada, or in general, I don't know, we can go for a rewind. If I want to fast forward, just like summarizing the 75 years in a soundbite, the problem, and this is why I don't buy just trying to black and white it into the oppressor-oppressed dynamic, because honestly, the way I think people use that is they're just using it as a proxy for goodies and baddies. It is way too simplistic. The problem when it comes to Palestinians is, despite the fact that they have always had legitimate grievances and they've always had a just cause, the problem is they've never had good leaders. They've never had good leaders, and internationally, they've never had good allies. They've always had allies who have gassed them up into believing that one day they're going to have enough strength or enough of a war of attrition to get Israel out of that entire area. And when they say Israel, a lot of them do think it means Jews as well. Like any Jew who arrived after 1917 would have to go back to either Europe or North Africa or Ethiopia or wherever else. That's the problem. And I think when people don't address that problem and they only expect all of the good things, your words, and all of the remedies to come from unilateral action from one side, is not a reasonable solution. It's not reasonable for a few reasons. Is that one is putting all of the attack on Israel basically only makes people who live there more susceptible to right-wingers, because there's nothing right-wingers like more in Israel than telling Jewish people that they're on their own, that the whole world is against them, and that if they don't fight, the only alternative is going to be that the surrounding countries and surrounding militias are eventually going to come in and kill them and chase them out into the sea. That's like the general Israeli right-wing position, and it's very easy to sell when this much international weight comes against one side and not on the other. And that's why the problem with, I think, the Palestinian cause, in a way, or the Palestinian leadership, is that they are still ultimately married to this decision. Hamas are still the most popular organization in Palestine. They're still more popular than Fatah. They're still more popular than any of the guys who get like 1 or 2% of the vote who pushed for economic development and reconciliation and things like that. They're obviously way bigger than any one state solution with equal rights group, because they don't want equal rights. They want an Islamic state from the river to the sea. And when you have this dynamic, then the issue is that you have every side has both, each side has every incentive to keep the conflict going forever. Israel has the incentive to keep it going forever because they can just keep on seizing settlements in the West Bank and encouraging right-wingers and bringing more and more psycho right-wingers into the government and capturing territory there. And then now they've got the IDF in half of Gaza as well. And then on the other side, you've got Palestinians who keep on getting this international backing from people who think that as long as we keep supporting resistance or attacks against Israel and isolating Israel on the world stage, then, you know, this Jewish state, we might not beat them in a all-out war, but over time, they might suffer a death of 1,000 cuts. So why give up? And this is the most toxic incentive on both sides. And the problem is that only one side wins that conflict, and it's Israel.
That's true. Okay, so they pulled out of Gaza in 2005, but Israel was still in Palestine, right? They had still encroached upon quite a bit of land.
Was there, before we go on, what was wrong with what I just said?
Well, I wrote down some notes. I don't think there was anything wrong with it.
You mentioned that they were still in the West Bank after they pulled out of Gaza, yes?
As far as I'm aware, yes. Right? That's correct. So Gaza, they pull out of Gaza. So Gaza is basically, for all intents and purposes, liberated, right? But the problem becomes they're still in areas around Gaza, and there's still fallout from them being in Gaza and oppressing them. So they're still angry. There's no reparations there, right? There's no, here's some, here's like what we owe you for having done this to you. So that you can so you can go back to the way things were, basically, which you can't really go back to the way things were ever, but for all intents and purposes, you get as close as you can. Like, I look at this the way that I view, like, systemic racism in America. Like, we never gave reparations to black people after slavery, right? So, like, of course they're still upset. Of course they still want, reparations because they never got it. And even, like, hundreds of years later, we still see the effects of that. So you're talking like they pull out of Gaza in 2005, literally only 2 years later, right? You expect them to be all hunky-dory and things are great now and not want any vengeance when Israel never really made up for what it did.
Well, it's not really hunky-dory though, is it? It's not hunky-dory. It's just expecting them to do things that might, like their leaders, to do things that would help their people. And Hamas didn't. Yes, Israel was still in the West Bank. I think in the Gaza withdrawal, they also destroyed 4 settlements in the West Bank. And then there was initially what was called the Convergence Plan, which was going to be a Gaza-style withdrawal from the West Bank as well, another unilateral one. Most of the international community advised against it because it became very clear after Lebanon and after Gaza that if Israel just does the leaving on one side and doesn't get any agreements or any negotiation with any leaders on the other side, then all you're doing is strengthening the military position of the militia that kicked you out or that chased you out in the first place. So as soon as they leave Lebanon, they get Hezbollah more empowered than ever with arms up the wazoo from Iran. And as soon as they leave Gaza, they get Hamas saying, okay, well, you've given us more breathing space. We're going to use it to just fight harder. Rockets from Gaza did not help the West Bank. There was no argument for that. And I don't think I think people are more intelligent than wanting vengeance. Like, people are not so stupid that Israel pulls out of Gaza, but then they think, oh, well, there was still a lot of violence that was inflicted upon us and occupation from the last few decades. So rather than building up our own lives and moving forward, we're just going to keep on firing rockets at you that do no damage at all, barely any, and definitely don't give us any gains. No, I don't think Hamas are that stupid. Hamas have a very good logical reason for doing what they're doing by keeping fighting. It's just that it doesn't really gel with like what people like us would want.
What do Hamas
They didn't get full
want
reparations, and Hamas wants an Islamic state from the river to the sea.
Okay, why do they want an Islamic state from the river to the sea?
I don't know. Origins in the Muslim Brotherhood, support from countries like the fact that they get given quite a lot of financial and material support from countries like Qatar, long-standing ideological grievances. I know that you're wanting me to say, well, because Israeli occupation made them angry. That doesn't
I don't want
explain
you to
why
say
Yemen
anything.
feels the same way. No, but that's kind of what the answer would be logical in your head, right?
I straight up asked the
If I asked you
question,
that question.
not knowing what your answer would be. I
Yeah, I
have no
know, but I'm
idea.
just anticipating that. Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying that I'm guessing if you were asked that question, it would be that, right? It would be because of Israeli occupation. That's why they want an Islamic State from the river to the sea. No?
Well, I mean, I'm not well versed in like the financial dealings between Hamas and all the other Islamic states. I don't know. But if I had to guess just from a fundamental level, like, religion is a strong driver of action, right? And if you have a strongly religious group like Hamas, who are Islamic extremists, they're driven by this doctrine to make sure that the doctrine is spread as far and wide as it can be. They have their set rules, and they feel like that is the good way to run the world, right? I think that would be like their driving motivator is they were taught by other people that Islam is good and Islamic extremism is good, and we need to make Sharia law everywhere, whatever, because that's what God wants. And so if you just tell enough people this, they're going to, the people who are saying these things are the ones who are at least, visibly protecting you from an invading force such as Israel. They're going to say, yeah, I want the same things they do because they're the ones doing good things for me and protecting me. But that's how I look at it. I don't know about the financial incentives. You know more about the area than I do, for sure. So that's probably part of it. But that's how I look at it, since you turned the question back on me.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is that they're propped up. They're propped up, and they're obviously part of a very long-standing ideological tradition in the Arab and Muslim world that extends to parties that are very far away from Israel as well, like Yemen, right? So that's one reason. But also, I think the other thing that I find frustrating is that they're gassed up by large powers in the rest of the world. It's not really surprising that in the past, when say the PLO, who were the leading Palestinian militia groups in the 80s, like when they were fighting a war in Beirut against Israel, there's a reason that they gave up a lot more quickly, and it's because most of the Arab and Western and Soviet world turned their backs on them. They just said, they told them to stop. But with Hamas, it feels like Hamas are just getting more and more rewarded. Like, I think this is the thing that people don't really get, is that, have you ever wondered, for example, why Hamas has not surrendered in Gaza? They don't think they're going to win, but...
Well, if I had to guess, most of the people who comprise Hamas think that they're freedom fighters.
But do they
That's why
think
they
that if
haven't
they
given
keep
up.
fighting, they're going to get any more freedom?
They think they
Freedom
will,
fighters give
yes.
up all the time, unfortunately.
Even,
Like
well, yes, but even if they think they're going to... I mean, you know the trope, right? It doesn't matter if we fail. The 300 Spartans, it goes back to them. Like, they knew they were going to fail. They fought anyway.
I don't think that necessarily works with Hamas because...
Why not?
Because when you listen to the way that they talk and the way that their supporters talk, is they don't think they're losing. Hamas thinks they're winning. Like, they think that because of the amount of destruction that's been brought upon Gaza and the amount of suffering that's resulted in so many international condemnations and turnarounds against Israel, they believe that fighting in that way, that Hamas choosing to fight, it basically embedded in the urban landscape and allowing for that destruction to happen,
then you
it's
just
given
said
them
why
a
they keep
boost.
fighting. You just said why they keep fighting. Then they think they're winning.
Yeah, they think they're winning in the sense that but it's worth the loss, right? It's worth Gaza being turned into what it is now, because it makes Israel look bad enough that it might leave them isolated on the world stage. But to me, the point I'm trying to make is that I don't know why these quote unquote resistance groups or freedom fighters like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, why they get given any sense of charity, or even in some cases, like with leftists, it's like it's full out support. But I don't really understand why that happens if you want Palestinians to live peacefully and safely, because these guys have a completely, like, their victory can happen even if all of Gaza gets destroyed, because that's what they want. They're happy to let that happen so long as it can eventually put Israel in a weaker position that they might fall apart later.
Sure. Let's say that I take a match and I burn my house down, right? And the reason that I burn my house down is because I know that is the easiest way to catch my neighbor's house on fire and make sure that theirs burns down as well. That's my goal, is to burn down their house, right? Mm-hmm. I must really hate my neighbor, right? To do that.
Yeah.
My neighbor must have done something pretty shitty to me, right? Or at least I think they did. That's how badly I
Yeah.
want to burn their house down, is that I'm willing to sacrifice my own, right?
Yeah, and I'm guessing if there was
So,
anyone out there who was supporting you doing that, you'd probably think that person is a bit weird.
well, if they support me, then they see things exactly the way I do. If I can see it that way, then so can somebody else. Let's say that my neighbor, like, killed my daughter, you know? Like, this is almost like movie material. Like my neighbor killed my daughter, so I'm going to set my own house on fire so that theirs gets set on fire because my house, my daughter's dead, right?
What if there are 2 million other civilians living in your house that are going to burn down with it?
Well, if I'm in an emotional state, the only thing I'm thinking about is my daughter, right? Like, I'm not making a rational decision.
Okay, I think in terms of a very, very complex film character, that sounds great. But if we're talking about like a
But this
political
is
movement that is supposed to be representing its people, I think that's
yes, but
insane.
this
No?
movement is comprised of individuals who all feel that way about Israel. That's how strongly they feel about Israel is they are willing to forego their own home in order to get one over on Israel. That's how bad Israel hurt them, right?
To be fair, I think most of Gaza didn't actually want to fight a war with Israel before October 7th. I think the polling on that suggested that most of them were not up for trying to do that.
Okay, well, the people who committed October 7th clearly did, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
those people were willing to fuck the same people who, again,
Hamas.
oppressed. Hamas oppresses Gazans, right? They oppressed Gazans before October 7th, and they continue to oppress them now. So
Sure. But again, most people who comprise Hamas don't see them. I mean, they don't, any of them see themselves as oppressors. They see themselves as freedom fighters.
I know, and I'm just trying to say that they're not. They're not fighting for freedom. They're fighting.
Okay, but they think they are, right? So,
Okay, and you know the Israelis think of themselves as indigenous refugees returning to their homeland. They think of themselves
Yes.
as anti-colonial. Yeah, so
yes. And that's why Israel, like, they basically see Gazans as the invaders, right? They see Palestinians as the invaders, right? So then how do we resolve
some of
this?
them do, yeah.
Yeah, so
Well, first of all, you
Israel,
have to argue about what's correct and what's actually compatible with things that we would actually consider to be a good outcome.
okay, but the first thing you have to do is lay all the cards on the table. Hamas sees themselves as freedom fighters, and Israel and Israelis, frankly, as an invading force. Israel sees themselves as, people of the homeland of Israel, and they're taking their land back from foreign invaders, right? So then we need to so then if Israel are the ones with more power and they're the ones doing more damage, then priority number one is to, what's the word? I can't think of the word. Priority number one is to make sure that Israel stops doing that, right? Because they're like, both sides see themselves as the good guy, but Israel has more power and they're doing more damage. So we need to convince Israel first and foremost, they need to stop what they're doing and pull out of Israel, right? That's step number one.
Pull out of Israel? You mean pull out of Gaza?
Because we're not going to get Hamas to stop first. We're not.
Okay. I feel like in the past, the groups like Hamas have stopped first, but
When was that?
when the PLO left Beirut, 80s.
Okay. Well, then maybe I misspoke. But okay, let's say this then. Hamas stopped first, right? And what did Israel do? They kept going, right?
What did they?
Well,
When?
if Hamas stopped, unless Hamas stopped and then resumed again, I don't know the sequence of events here. But if Hamas stopped, I assume that Israel is the one who kept perpetuating this, right?
Depending on which ceasefire you're talking about, the breaking ceasefire. Is that what you're talking about? January?
Who broke the ceasefire?
That's very disputable. You can probably say Israel, but again, that was because the stages of the ceasefire were not being upheld by Hamas. Hamas were not willing to go to the stage of disarming, which was part of what was expected of them.
Okay.
And they're still not
Why?
doing that. They're still
So-
basically saying
right.
that they don't want to disarm. Like, yeah.
Right. Because they don't trust Israel, right?
No, it's not because they don't trust Israel.
Come on, man. What do you mean it's not because they don't
No,
trust Israel?
what do you mean? Come on, Israel. No, what do you mean they don't trust? Yeah, yeah. Why is that? Why is that a weird thing to say? Do you think Hamas genuinely believes that their weapons are helping their own people, are defending their people?
Yes, that's why they want them. What are you talking about?
You think Hamas, after
course they
what's
believe
happened in
that.
the last 2 years, think that their weapons defend Gazans?
Either defend Gazans or destroy Israel, right?
No, it's one or the other. Actually, what do you?
They
How?
probably
Can you
see it
tell
as
me how that
both.
happens, like,
They
dramatically?
probably see it as both, don't you think?
No, I don't think
No.
I don't think they give a fuck about what happens to Gaza. No,
Really?
they clearly
Come
don't.
on.
Like,
No.
I
yes,
mean, we
they
can
do.
talk about, we can look at Sinwar's communication describing the losses as necessary sacrifices, or people going onto Al Jazeera from the Hamas leadership and talking about how these are tactical losses. And they're talking about the entire strip getting flattened. Yeah, I don't think they care. They don't.
Okay. necessary
Why do you think they built
sacrifices.
all their infrastructure in
So,
civilian areas?
but they're not out here saying, well, they're just fodder. You know, we don't care about them. We don't care about
No,
them at
well,
all.
they call them martyrs, I guess. I mean, I suppose they
Sure,
appreciate them and they
martyrs.
revere them in the sense that they're martyrs for the cause.
Martyrs for the cause. They martyr them, right? They say, look at these beautiful, brave people who helped our cause, right?
Like civilians who got killed in an airstrike, yeah.
So they at least have to put on a show, right? They know that they at least have to appear as though they are fighting for the defense of Gazans, right?
What's the difference between them being martyrs and fodder, actually?
Well, it's the presentation. If you're just fodder, then nobody gives a shit about you. If you're a martyr, then everybody gives a shit about you.
Isn't that still... Yeah, but I'm talking about to someone who's not religious. Like, what's the difference between... What's the meaningful difference between that being a martyr and being fodder?
This is about Hamas's framework of the situation. They are framing the situation such that the people who died in Gaza are worthy, necessary sacrifices for the end goal of destroying Israel, because Israel is the primary oppressor and they're the ones who are going to destroy everybody in Palestine if they don't put a stop to it. That's Hamas's framework, right?
Yeah. If that was you as one of those civilians, would you feel like a martyr or fodder out of interest?
I don't know. There are plenty of Palestinians and Gazans who think, okay, you know what? Fair. Israel is the one doing more damage. I see it all the time, maybe in my real personal life. So if Hamas is telling me, and Hamas is at least treating me with some dignity and respect, it's not like Israel's out here calling their victims martyrs, right? Just shit on all the Palestinians they kill, right? So if I'm going to get killed, I can at least be martyred by Hamas and revered, rather than have my corpse shit on by Israel. Yes, I might very well grow up in Gaza and say, you know what? It's a worthy sacrifice if I die, because f*** Israel.
I pretty sure most people in Gaza, maybe there's polling that you've seen that I haven't. I'm pretty sure most people in Gaza don't want to die. I think that's kind of, that was like the whole essence of the...
Did I say want to die? Did I say that? Or are you putting words in mouths again?
It sounded like you implied it, no?
No.
You said like, no. Yeah, because at least I can do this to be a martyr to Israel, no?
If I'm going to die anyway, that doesn't mean I want to. It means if I'm going to, then I may as well be a martyr and not have my corpse shit on by Israel, right?
So they think it's unconditional. Okay, so they think their death's unconditional. Okay, I understand what you're saying now. Okay.
Their deaths are... Say that again?
Like their deaths are, like, it's unconditional. They're going to die anyway, regardless of what Hamas does, or...
No, listen very carefully. I'm saying if I understand my life to be at risk of dying, of losing my life, I would rather lose my life to Hamas, who are going to martyr me, right? Because of their actions, I'd rather lose my life that way and be a martyr than I would be a victim of Israeli invasion, right? Like just have my corpse shit on by Israel. I respect Hamas more because at least they're going to martyr me and call me a worthy sacrifice. At least my death means something. So that's not me wanting to die. That's me saying if I'm going to die, at least my death will mean something.
Okay. And I'm guessing this is a perspective you're characterizing. Like, you don't agree with this yourself, right?
This is what you asked me, would I want that? And my answer is, I'm not saying I would want to die if I were a Palestinian. I'm saying if I understand my life to be at risk anyway, that's how I would want to go out, is as a martyr and a necessary sacrifice to destroy the greater evil. I think that's completely reasonable.
Gotcha. I'm just going to put a statement for you, and you can just see what you want to make of it. Right. I'm guessing, like, you probably believe the general demand now, which is for Israel to just kind of like pack up and leave Gaza, and then Gaza just kind of is left to whoever's left there in charge or whatever else, right? Like, just stop and leave.
I think that's a good start. I think that if the outside world could give reparations to Gaza and help them rebuild, I think that would be a better start, like a next step, right? Because I don't just want Israel to fuck off and leave Gazans on their lonesome. I would like the rest of the world to step in and help them rebuild.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with that second half.
Yeah.
I'm also going to pose to you though, and see what you think of this. Is that I don't think, and a pretty good reason to believe, there is not going to be any future in Gaza so long as Hamas can stay in power. As long as Hamas still have control over the levers of power in Gaza, they will use any breathing space, like a Israeli withdrawal, to basically just pursue the same strategy again. As far as they're concerned, it worked. They just need to do it more and more effectively. They've said as much on TV. They're pretty unshy about it. Which is just leaving the question again, is that what would be the point in leaving things back in their hands if all they want to do is rebuild all those tunnels and fire rockets again and invite airstrikes into their area.
Okay. Hamas's mission, as we've agreed, is destroy Israel. 2 words, destroy Israel, correct? We can sum it up as that. So they want to destroy Israel because they see Israel as a dangerous invading force that is killing their people, right? So if Israel withdraws completely and says, we will stop destroying your people, openly, publicly apologize even, bow their heads or whatever, just in theory, what would Hamas have to stand on then? Like, what would they actually be able to say and be like, no, we still got to destroy Israel, guys. I swear, bro, I swear, right? They have nothing. That's why it's so imperative that Israel makes the first move, because until they do, Hamas has grounds to stand on to say we are going to destroy Israel. They're justified.
Okay, I'm trying to not bombard you with a bunch of historical claims, but it's just a bit, I'll keep it brief. You're describing Israel's withdrawal from 2005, and you're describing their withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000.
From Gaza, not from Palestine, not the West Bank, from Gaza only, right?
Yeah. What about Lebanon then? They left Lebanon, right? The UN drew a line, and Israel went all the way back to the line. They went at every point. They went past the blue line that the UN told them to leave at, and they said to Hezbollah, "Yeah, we're done here. If you fire at us, we're gonna come back with brutal force." And Hezbollah just kept on. They kept on getting rockets, and they kept on firing them, and they kept on kidnapping soldiers, and they kept on crossing the border. So no, I don't think it's asking for unilateral disengagement from a group that doesn't think in the same way that you do. Hamas can very easily manufacture consent from their own people to keep up the fight. All they would have to do is do what Hezbollah did. They'll invent another reason. Hezbollah invented other reasons, and they just went with it. Like or they just attack them because the reprisal will make people angry, and then they'll just recruit from that.
What you just said was interesting, because basically what you said was they pulled out of Lebanon and they said, don't invade us, right? Don't come over here. So they never actually apologized. They never actually took accountability for what they did in Lebanon. Like nothing. They just pulled out and said, leave us alone, right? They didn't even give them any reparations, nothing, right? They just came into the house, it up, and left. And you just expect the people in Lebanon to sit back and do nothing about that.
Why would they give reparations to Hezbollah?
If you go in somewhere and you fuck up the place and you leave, whoever owns that place or resides there is going to be very upset at you for good reason, and they might come back and take vengeance. Unless you say,
matter why you went in there?
Does it matter? Okay, why did they go in there then?
Because of the PLO? Because the PLO were in Beirut? Because they were launching attacks into Israel?
Okay, why were the PLO launching attacks?
Because that was the leader of the Palestinian movement at the time, and they'd been kicked out of Jordan, so they were in Beirut and they were in Lebanon, and then they were still wanting to keep up the fight against Israel. So, and then you're going to say, and then I guess because these groups they don't want Israel to exist. It's like Hezbollah made a few demands of Israel after Israel pulled off in 2000. They made demands. I don't recall an apology ever being one of them.
Okay, what were the demands?
So they tried to claim the Sheba farms, which is a small territory that is actually legally part of Syria. Very small. It's not even really farmland, most of it, just in the north of Israel and Lebanon. So the UN draws this blue line, and the blue line is decided to be the international border between Israel and Lebanon. Israel pulls back to that blue line. They go so far that actually there's one small town that has a fence around it that's been there for decades, and they just pull the fence back a few meters just to stay within the blue line. So they pull back to exactly where the UN tells them to. Hezbollah says, well, actually, there's this place called the Sheba Farms, and we had a border dispute with Syria decades ago, and because they decided that maybe the Sheba Farms could be Lebanese, and there's an argument for that, Hezbollah kept on firing because Israel was in the Sheba Farms, even though Syria has never legally.
Who was in the Sheba Farms? Who was in the Sheba Farms? Who was in the Sheba Farms? Israel?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it. Keep going.
Except from the fact that barely anyone, I don't even know if any Lebanese people even lived there. Yes, they just decided that out of nowhere, they were going to bring up this claim to the Sheba Farms that hadn't even existed in Lebanese politics for the preceding decades. And then they decided that was going to be their cause. And then I think the last claim that they had was that they wanted to get Lebanese prisoners freed from Israeli jails, of whom there were 2, both of whom had gone into Israel, one of whom had committed a mass murder in Israel, and the other one I think was like a double intel agent who was serving only a few months left. So they will conjure up any excuse. Like these aren't reasonable demands. These are just things for the national story because the ultimate goal doesn't go away. They just use these proxy demands and then use that as the excuse to just keep on the ultimate goal, which is to destroy Israel.
Okay, so they made these demands. What was the response to these demands?
They're not reasonable.
Okay, they said these demands aren't reasonable, and then when the PLO heard the demands weren't reasonable, they fired on Israel, right? They
Well,
were
this is
looking for a
Hezbollah.
fight. Huh? Hezbollah.
Hezbollah
Sorry.
kidnapped. Yeah, they kidnapped Israeli soldiers and tried to do prisoner swaps. That was their whole goal. That was their whole little strategy.
So I'm a little confused. So PLO and Hezbollah. So the PLO is in charge of. Like I said, I'm an idiot when it comes to that area. So PLO is in charge of Lebanon, right?
No, the PLO had they built kind of like what you call like a non-state group. They were a state within a state. But the PLO were gone from Lebanon by this point. The
Okay, they
PLO
were
left
gone from
Lebanon in the 80s. Yeah.
In the 80s. And then Hezbollah took over.
Hezbollah took over the south of Lebanon
The south of Lebanon.
and South Beirut. Yeah.
Okay, so Hezbollah's in charge of. Hold on. Hezbollah in charge of South Lebanon in the 80s. Okay, so Hezbollah's making these demands after Israel had already pulled out of Lebanon, right? So what they wanted was Lebanese prisoners freed, of which there were two. One was a mass murder. The other only had a few months left. And the other thing they wanted was territory. They tried to take advantage of the fact that Israel was occupying these Sheba farms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fair. If everything you're telling me is factual, I don't agree with them doing that. I think that they were taking advantage of a situation very unfairly. Okay, so then they fire, rockets into Israel, you said?
It was more border crossings. The rockets came after Israel was retaliating.
Okay,
They
border
amassed
crossings.
a lot of rockets, though.
Okay, they amassed a lot of rockets. They had border crossings. So what happened in these border crossings?
They would try to kidnap soldiers sometime, and there was one event where they ended up killing 8 of them.
Kidnapped soldiers, massacred 8 of them in one incident. Okay, so they're doing things that aren't good to do, obviously. We both agree on that. So I guess my best pushback to this would be none of that would have happened if Israel had not been there in the first place, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That is quite true. What would have happened if... Okay, sorry, go on. You were going to say something else.
No, I'm just saying that Israel, is the root of all of this. So even if you have other parties who are involved that are doing bad things, and we should stop them from doing those bad things, ultimately, the first problem that needs to be solved is Israel's involvement in Palestine, period. Okay? Now, once they did that, crossed the border and took soldiers, what happened after that? What was Israel's response?
Well, they tolerated it for a few years because it happened a few times. In 2006 was the one where 8 soldiers died, and then they launched a 34-day war against Hezbollah, carried out airstrikes. It was a pretty bad war. Israel did terribly. They lost a lot of guys and were very bad at their targeting.
Okay, so Israel launched that war, right?
Well, I don't know if you count crossing the border and killing people as launching the war or not, but yeah, they escalated it for sure.
Well, it was so basically what you have here is in a vacuum, it was Lebanon crossing the border into Israel, kind of like an invading force, taking over soldiers, killing them. And then Israel's response was to launch strikes into across the border into Lebanon, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what did these strikes look like? Were they targeted? Were they what was their goal with these strikes? What was the goal?
Their goal was to dismantle or severely weaken Hezbollah's infrastructure, possibly kill their leader. They failed at that. He survived. I mean, they stated the goal was to get the kidnapped soldiers back, but I think at the time it was also quite well understood that they were probably dead or had gone to Iran or some shit. So as far as the strikes go, as far as the strikes go, initially they were quite targeted. The initial campaign was quite confident. Later on, they basically had a really brain-dead chief of staff who believed that everything could be won from the air. So they emphasized airstrikes way too much, and they started later on trying to find targets with much weaker intel, like circumstantial intel. That once at least resulted in a strike that killed a house that just had a family of like 50 people in it. At other points, they sent their ground troops in, but the ground troops were very, very ill prepared. Quite a few of them died, and they only managed to raid a few Hezbollah villages or towns and then just left shortly afterwards. They found out that quite a lot of Hezbollah's infrastructure was in the rural nature sites, which was never seen before. So yeah, they just got kind of a little bit, they got quite overwhelmed, I think. They generally won most of the battles, but they came out of it not really having gained that much.
Okay, so then so Israel had a leader at some point that made really dumb decisions and killed innocent people in Lebanon again. Right, so we're just going in a circle here, is what it looks like. Where like you got Israel invades Lebanon and whatever other area, and then they pull out, and then the people that they pulled out from are making unreasonable demands, trying to take advantage of the situation, and when they don't get what they want, they go and invade Israel with much less power, mind you. I don't think that Lebanon has nearly the power and backing that Israel does, but they're trying, right? And then Israel comes back over again, and but Israel, once again, is the group of people with the most power. So I have more issue with Israel retaliating in a unjustified and overwhelming way and killing innocent people than I do with the inverse. Because they simply have more power, more backing. They're largely the ones responsible for all of this in the first place. So my point is, Israel right now is in Gaza. Israel is in Palestine. They are invading their space, period. And so that is the problem that I want to, it's the problem you have to tackle first. You have to get them out first. Now, if we could rewind back to 2006 in Lebanon, then, and I saw what was going on back then. I was only like 11 back then. But if I saw what was going on back then, and I was paying attention to it, I would have said, you know what? Lebanon is making some really shitty decisions here. This is stupid. They got what they wanted. Israel's out of their territory, right? So they need to just stop taking advantage of the situation and accept that. And then if they want to make more demands, those demands ought to be reasonable, right? So like I would have been against Lebanon doing that. But the bottom line is we can only tackle that part once Israel's out, right? Like Israel has to leave first. So Israel needs to get out of Palestine, period. And that's why people like Hasan get so uppity when somebody asks the question, do you condemn Hamas? Because this isn't currently about Hamas. It's about Israel invading Palestine. Hamas is just the resistance force.
Okay, let's go. So you keep on bringing up this theme, and maybe it gets to the root of the whole issue, is that, like, yeah, none of this would have happened had Israel not been a thing in the first place. That's kind of like the root, isn't it? Because we talk about cycle of violence. You ever heard the theory of like it's not really a cycle; it's more of a spiral of violence. And the spiral has a center. I guess to you, the center is Israel existing, like Israel.
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily Israel existing; it's Israel imposing itself onto Palestine.
Okay, so that's a good question. I think that's probably the important thing to look at. I don't know. Do you want me to ask you or tell you? Like, I don't really need to be like afraid of giving a wrong answer or anything. But like why is Israel there? Like why did at some point a bunch of Jews go there and decide that that's going to be a country?
My understanding is that it has roots in World War II, where Jews were kind of making a large, like a mass exodus from very anti-Semitic areas. Is that correct? Like they were looking for a place in, that area of the world where they could be safe, right? Like that was their goal.
Almost. It has roots in 1881 more than World War II. It was after the death of, I think it's Alexander the second or third. But yeah, Russian pogroms, basically. Pogroms in the Russian Empire. That's roughly when the Zionist movement was formed. That's when the first few thousand people started moving to Ottoman Palestine back then and establishing a presence. And it carried on after World War I. They got the British and the League of Nations giving them consent to have a national home there. World War II was obviously the kind of thing that made the rest of the world join in on deciding that this was probably a good idea to have a state there. So yeah, the roots go way back before World War II, but more or less. So summarizing that, a lot of Jews fleeing anti-Semitic places decide that they want to have a home in somewhere, and they choose Palestine. Do we know how they decided to go about that? Like, what did they do when they got there?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have no idea. So, like back in 1881, what did they do? Did they just find open land where nobody was and settle there? Because I think that's fine.
Most of that was what they did in the beginning. Some of the land had people living on it, and there's a whole ethical dispute about whether or not, like, a lot of the land was owned by absentee landlords, and then the people living there were tenant farmers. So by Ottoman law, or British later on, they were able to buy the land and evict the tenant farmers and have Jews there. But for the most part, the earliest land that they bought was malaria-infested swampland that they drained. Tel Aviv was built in a sand dune right next to the city of Jaffa. So it varies. I think evictions became a bit more prominent in the 20s, but yeah, before that it was a combination of empty and inhabited land.
And they felt justified in these convictions because the evictions, because these evictions were largely absentee landlords at first, right? Like people who didn't even like live in the land or work it. It was literally just people who had bought up, owned the land, and sit on it and do nothing with it.
No, the landlords weren't evicted. It was the tenants that were evicted. So there were tenant farmers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there were tenants
people
living
who worked
there.
the land,
Okay.
and they also, yes, in some cases there were tenants living there. I'm guessing they found that justified because it was just normal to do back then. Like sometimes the land that they bought was it evicted tenant farmers, but those tenant farmers were only there because the previous dwellers were Bedouins who had been evicted by the Arab landowner. So yeah.
So this is just a cycle of eviction then.
Part of it is, yeah.
Okay, which, you know, Israel is the latest perpetrator of, right? Like, they're the ones doing the evictions right now, unjustified evictions, in order to make, like, whatever reason you want to give, you know, in order to make homes for themselves at the expense of other people who already live there, right? That's how this all started.
I mean, I would say the evictions of now are probably a bit different from the ones in the 1800s. In the 1800s, they were acting within the law of the land, and it mostly, I think, before the British were there, it mostly involved compensation as well. So
Sure.
I don't think the roots of the conflict are in buying land in the 1800s and evicting tenant farmers sometimes, but not even always. Most of the land was empty.
Did these tenant farmers want to leave? Did they want to accept the money and go, or was this not their choice?
Some of them wanted to leave, some of them didn't.
Okay, so then there are at least, like, some who did not want to leave. They were forced out of their home, even if they were paid for it. They were forced out of their home, right? By people who called themselves Israel. I don't know if they called it that back then, but they would become Israel, right? And they were forcing people out of their homes to take it over. So it seems to me that that's what Israel has its roots in, is evicting people against their will and taking their homes over, right?
Well, majority of the land that they bought was still empty and swampland, but
Sure.
the Arab nationalists of the time wanted that for themselves as well. So it's there's a bit of push and pull. Out of interest, these Jews are doing this, and you know, obviously they're leaving countries where anti-Semitism and modern nationalism is obviously threatening their life. They go to this one place where it seems like there is a small movement emerging where they can maybe have their own way of doing things, and like they can have protection from like local security, and they can have funding from charitable donators around the world. They've got this option. I'm just wondering, like, what do you think they should have done?
Not taking over other people's homes, for one. I mean, frankly, if you want to go way back, then people shouldn't have been anti-Semitic, right? Like that's step one, is people should have not been anti-Semitic. But why were they anti-Semitic? Like, what happened that made them anti-Semitic? I don't know. Like, we could go farther and farther and farther back to the root of like human conflict, but we can only work with what we have right now. So, you know, you have a group of people who have nowhere to live, nowhere to go, and to sustain themselves, they decide to kick other people out of their homes and take them over, because that's the option that they're left with, right? We agree on that? Yeah, because of anti-Semitism. So you could maybe forgive them for that, sure, but the people who live there, if they don't forgive them for that, then I would say that they're justified in not forgiving them, because that's their home that got taken. Why do they give a where those people came from or why they did that? You know, like, they just want their homes back.
Out of interest, how long should a tenant farmer be allowed to uphold a grievance over an eviction? Often when compensation is, let's say compensation is even offered here, how long do they have the right to keep that claim solidified and to make it even by force?
It just depends on what they want. Like, if there's a farmer who gets evicted, like if there's a farmer in Palestine in the 1800s who gets evicted by a Jewish family that is seeking an anti-Semite free home, away from anti-Semitism, whatever, right? And 20 years later, that farmer is like, well, that happened to me 20 years ago. I would like that farm back. Like, there's still stuff there that was there for me. I planned to raise my family there. Like, that was my ancestral home. That's where I grew up. So I want it back. I think that's a fair claim to make, don't you?
One of the biggest land purchases, there's 1920s, it's called the Sursuk purchases. Big, wealthy Lebanese family owns this land in what is now Israel. The Zionists want to buy it. There are tenants living there. The tenants actually protest this. They don't want to leave, even with compensation. But they eventually do. The landlord, the Arab landlord evicts them. The Jews come in and it's like, oh, it's empty. Let's buy it now. Okay. And then let's say those Arab tenant farmers, those Palestinian tenant farmers get their land back. They fight for it. They chase the Zionist owners away. But then they've got the land. But then the Bedouins who lived there before them, before they were evicted, come to their door and say, actually, that's my ancestral land. We were there before you. Is that okay? Is that acceptable?
Well, we have to sit them down at the table. We have land in between these two groups that they're in dispute over, and we have to decide who has the greater claim, right? So on one hand, you have the Palestinian tenant farmers who, lived there and grew up there their entire lives, and they're still alive, and they still have personal attachments to this land. And then they got the boot from, from Israelis who moved in, right? And then they get their land back. This is the hypothetical, right? They get the land back. The Palestinian tenant farmers get the land back. But then how do you pronounce it? Bedouin or Bedouin?
Bedouin. Yeah, Bedouin. Both is fine.
Bedouin. Okay, so the Bedouins come back, and they say, well, actually, this is our land. You see, because we owned it. This is our ancestral home. So there's a couple things to consider here. The Bedouins sold them out, did they not?
No, the Bedouins were evicted when the wealthy Arab owners bought the land.
Okay, I got it. So wealthy Arab owners bought the land. The Bedouins were already there. Okay. So yeah, this is a difficult conflict. I think so. If the Bedouins, they need to somehow compromise, right? There needs to be a compromise here. So the Bedouins want the land back. I mean, what do the Bedouins want with the land? Do they just want to live there and work it and
Does it matter? It's their ancestral homeland, same as the Arabs.
It just would depend on their case. What's their case? So it's their ancestral homeland. What do they want to do with the land? Like this basically comes down to a court case. Like it's an ownership court case.
Okay, just one. First of all, I really appreciate you being like a cool guy and everything, because this conversation is actually really interesting to me now. Thank you.
Yeah,
okay.
Me too.
I mean that honestly. Okay, shit. Okay, I'm curious.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm curious though, why did you not ask that question for the Palestinians? You only asked it for the Bedouins.
Okay, good point. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Palestinians versus the Israelis. Is that what you mean? Like the Israelis are claiming that this is their ancestral homeland, right?
No. I'm talking about the Arab farmers who get booted out so the Zionists can buy the land, and they deserve that land back. It's their ancestral land. Who cares if it was owned by someone else? Okay, fair point. And then the Bedouins come when the Arabs get the land back, hypothetically, and the Bedouins say it's ours. But then suddenly you start asking questions like, well, it depends. Well, what do they want to do with the land? What's their claim? It's their ancestral homeland. Like, what's their intentions with it? But you ask those questions about the Bedouins wanting their land back, but not about the Arab farmers. To them, it was more just like it's their ancestral homeland, therefore.
But no, so I said that about the Bedouins, but not who? I missed that part.
The Arabs, the Palestinians,
the Arabs
who wanted the land back. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, do
you see what I'm saying?
I think I do. I don't think it changes my point though. Like, if you feel like I'm being inconsistent.
Yeah, so, I think you were much more willing to be unconditional when it was Palestinian tenant farmers taking their land back from Zionists, but when it was Bedouins taking their land back from the Arabs, then suddenly we're like, well,
sure.
why? Maybe
sure,
it's complicated.
I can explain this. So the Zionists come in and take the land by force, right?
No, they buy it.
They buy it. Well, but the people who were living there didn't agree to the buy. They didn't agree to the purchase. They took the money because that's all they could do, and they left. Like they didn't have a choice.
Yeah, same with the Bedouins. Bedouins didn't have a choice when they were evicted. That's why they're coming back.
Okay, so fair point. So then let's talk about first of all, the people coming back to this place, are they the ones who are still alive? Because my understanding was that this was maybe 20, 30 years later. These are people coming back for the homes that they actually grew up and lived in. I think that if you grew up in a place, you have a strong claim to that place, in my opinion. It's a very strong claim.
So for you, because obviously I think Palestinian nationalists would, or Palestinians in general, would definitely take issue with you holding that position. But you're saying that if
Okay.
it's you, you keep the claim, but your descendants don't, right?
I mean, kind of like my ancestors grew up in Germany. But if I went over to Germany right now and tried to kick somebody out of one of my ancestral houses, then of course people are going to be like, "What are you talking about? That family's lived there for decades now."
Yeah. I understand. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So,
I mean,
but if I
I agree with
grew
that.
up in
So
that house, if I grew up in that house, and then that family came in and kicked me out, then of course I would go back. Like if I go back and say, "You guys kicked me out of this house, I want it back," that's a much stronger claim, don't you think?
so it's not. I think we were using the term ancestral land up until now, but I'm guessing that's kind of redundant since it's not about being ancestral land. It's just that's where I used to live.
I think that's part of it. I think that if you have
Okay.
ancestral claims to a land, you can work that into your argument. I just don't think it's as strong a point or conviction as I have a personal attachment to this land. I grew up in it. I was born in it. It raised me. The land raised
Mhm.
me. Like that's a pretty
Okay. Well,
visceral emotional attachment.
for the sake of argument, this whole thing happened in the space of about 30 or 40 years, so it can quite easily
Sure.
assume that some of these Bedouins trying to get their land back are still alive.
Okay, great. So then we have Bedouins coming back to try to take their land back from the Palestinians who took it from them first, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, they didn't even
Well,
take
I
it. The landlord took it and then rented it out to them. But yeah.
well, yeah, sure, but okay, so then it wasn't even these Palestinians' fault then, right?
Well, yeah, but that's the point of them being tenant farmers. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So they just literally like due to circumstances happened to be on stolen land and grew up in it and was raised by this land and worked the land and whatever. But they weren't consciously thinking, oh, that we stole this land. Like they weren't participants in that. So, I mean, there's a very difficult case to be made here for both sides. Like, you know, you're a tenant farmer whose landlord stole this land and rented it out to you without really explaining the full context of what he did. So both of these groups have pretty fair claims to this land. And frankly, like, I don't know. I don't know the answer. It would have to
Isn't
literally be a court case.
Yeah, and often it was, but obviously with court cases, this was Ottoman rules or later British rules in the 1800s and 1900s. If you were the property owner, that was your decision, right? Like that was generally how that went.
Sure, back then.
But if we're talking about, yeah, but if we're saying, yeah, some of it, pretty much all of us, incidentally, probably live on some stolen land. You're an American, obviously.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
yeah. That's also true of Israelis, though, right? Most Israeli Jews didn't actually do the purchasing and the evicting themselves. Most of them didn't do that at all. Most Israelis today are born there. Um, the majority of Israeli Jews weren't even involved in the Nakba, right? They came after from
Hmm.
the Middle East and North Africa.
That's
So,
true.
uh, yeah, that's why I think calling Israel like the root of the issue is I'm struggling to see what Jewish refugees who are fleeing the rise of anti-Semitism in the 20th century uh, should feel culpable for starting a conflict that's gone on almost 100 years later because some of them happened to find themselves renting a flat or renting a house in a stolen village,
This is how the cycle of
stolen and
violence.
purchased, right?
Yeah. This is the cycle of violence we're talking about. It goes back and back and back and back and back and back and back. And, you know, you can go as far back as you want to when we were still animals. And people have just always been in this cycle of, I'm going to take what's yours. And then somebody else comes in and takes what's theirs. And then somebody else, and maybe some groups will return and take it back. And then some other group will come and take it back. And like nobody's sitting down and trying to hash this shit out and just figure out, okay, you see it as your home. I see it as my home. Why can't we just say it's our home and just live here and coexist peacefully because we both love this land. We both lived in it and grew up in it and know it very well. I think we can get along. You know, maybe we'll just build a house like some way down the road and we just coexist and get along peacefully.
Yeah,
What's wrong with
and
that?
believe it or not, that did happen very, very early on.
Yeah.
Very early on, there was this whole cycle where Zionists, very small Zionist group, this was mostly when it was empty land. They would buy a bit of farmland or a
Hmm.
swamp and drain it and make it farmland, and then they would have an Arab village neighboring them, like a couple of miles away, and the initial response from the Arab villages was sometimes they would be indifferent to them. Sometimes maybe they just didn't like the look of them because they were foreign and all that. Sometimes they would laugh at them because these Jewish people were not like farmers when in the countries they came from. So there's one story about like Arab villagers just coming and helping some Jews when they were trying to herd camels, but like they were horses, which you can't do. So they thought was funny. But anyway, but there was a problem where sometimes there would be very loose Ottoman land codes where no one knew who owned what bit of land, or because now this was another big tension was that a lot of these Palestinian Arabs believed that land was sometimes communal. So even though no one owned it, and then it was bought by Zionists and treated like a private property because of new Ottoman laws, they sometimes would send their animals in there to graze, even though it wasn't their land that they owned, because that was like their custom. And then the Jews would put up fences, and then that would cause resentment. And then sometimes there'd be attacks and like robberies, and then there would be like Arab raids on the town. But eventually, some of these Zionists decided that one of the ways around it was to be quite defensive and quite strict with the border of your village, but being very olive branchy, like beyond. So there would be a period of fighting, and then later on they would become more friendly and they would engage in mutually beneficial trade. And sometimes the Jews would hire Arab security guards, and they would buy their produce, and they would sell stuff that they had, or like share European farming techniques with them and shit like that. So that did happen a bit. The problem is that for the most part, and maybe we can go into the broader issue here, is that you're right. When you have this issue, it makes a lot of sense for people like us to look at that and say, this is ridiculous. Like most of this is the Israelis and Palestinians live so close together. Like you can't really feel it unless you've actually been there as well, I think. Like to think that you can go from a West Bank town where Hamas are the most popular group and there are their flags everywhere, and people who will interview you will just happily tell you that all the Jews over there should go and get thrown out into Poland or whatever. And then 10 minutes down the road, you go into another Palestinian town, but it's in Israel, and it's just very quiet, and they have the same flag as Hamas, like an Islamic flag, but it's for the Islamic party in Israel, Ram, which preaches coexistence, and it's very quiet, and there are Jews shopping for Shabbat because they can't shop in their own areas on the weekend. And looking at that conflict and looking at what it's over to us seems insane. It seems so stupid. The problem is trying to go to one side or the other in this endless conflict and saying, you need to make all the moves here. It's up to you. Whereas when I see the way that Zionism started and the way that they started to get that land in Palestine, the problem is that the appetite to try and make this work was not there. It just wasn't, for two reasons. One, Jews didn't really want to become a minority in another blooming nation, because to them, nation states were the opposite of safety for Jews. You understand that, right? Like the whole thing of nationalism is it's good for the in-group, it's really bad for the out-group, and especially bad for Jews. So whether it's the French Revolution and then following the Dreyfus affair, or the Russian Empire, like nationalism is shit if you're a Jew. So they don't really want to be a minority in this country of Palestine because they're not really sure, and they've not really given any good reason to think that Arab nationalism is going to be any different. It doesn't seem like it's going to be that different. Palestinians don't really want to concede anything either and learn to live with these new people because they're not learning the language. They're just weird Europeans doing their little weird European thing. Occasionally they're evicting people. And also later on in the 1900s, they're expecting some of this land to be carved out for them. And like, why? That's been Arab since the 8th century or 7th century. So why the fuck were we going to hand it over to these guys? So the problem is that neither side is really in a position, or for a long time has not been in a position where making a concession makes any sense to them. Do you know what I mean? So when you talk about Zionism being kind of like the root of the issue, then the problem I run into with that is I don't think at the time Jews who went to Palestine, whether they were the person who bought land to get tenants evicted, or whether they were a refugee who arrived and happened to take a house in that land, or whether they had empty land or previously swampland, or whether they built a city in Tel Aviv, they were not welcome. They were not welcome, and they were told to leave, or at best become minority citizens in a nation that we have no guarantee will protect you. Like, we have no guarantee this won't just be another Russia. And for the Jews, they were like, okay, well, we've already fled Russia. We've already fled Eastern Europe. We've already fled France or Germany. Later on, we've already fled the Middle East. Like, we're not going to like this is the end of the road. We're staying here. We're putting our feet down, and if they want to come and stop us, we're gonna fight because that's it. So that's the problem. There is I don't think when we talk about Zionism being the root is I don't know what else Zionists really could have done against or should have done, broadly speaking. Obviously, there were small like war crimes and shit you should never do, but broadly speaking, in terms of actually forming that country of Israel, I don't think they had any reasonable alternative offered to them.
Okay. I do have to wrap this up in a second, but I want to address your points. You said, 1, Jews don't want to become a minority in another blooming nation. 2, Palestinians don't want to concede anything because there are foreigners coming in and unfairly evicting them, right? I think both of those are fair because if you look at history, you know, Jewish people have been oppressed, an oppressed minority in pretty much every place that they go. And so they decided, you know what? It's going to be different this time. This time we're going to be the big bad guy in charge, right? And we're not going to be a minority. And so, you know, we're not going to get duped. You know, they're afraid of getting duped. They're traumatized. They're a traumatized group of people, right? Like, and rightfully so. They have every reason to be traumatized, especially in the post-World War II era, right? And so this is how this cycle keeps proliferating, right? Somebody has to stop the cycle. Somebody does. Okay? And my argument is it needs to be Israel, not Hamas, because Hamas is not nearly as powerful. They don't have nearly the tools at their disposal to fend off an Israeli attack, clearly, because Israel keeps expanding while Palestine keeps shrinking. And so Israel, in my opinion, needs to be the first to back off. And then when there's inevitable fallout from Hamas, which there will be, you know, there's going to be some growing pains, they simply defend. They defend and they say, and they don't push back unnecessarily. They just defend. Right? And because they have the capability to do that. They have the Iron Freaking Dome. Okay? And I'm not saying that it's going to be like all sunshine and rainbows and lollipops, but like they have a greater capacity to defend themselves than Palestine does. Right? And frankly, guess what? I think Israel does have a right to defend itself. But defense is the key. Right now, everybody's calling the IDF the IOF because they're in Palestine's house. So that's not defense, that's offense. So Israel needs to be the first people to pull out and say, we are the invading force right now, right? And we need to stop doing that and put an end to this cycle. Right? Because they're the ones with the power. So the person currently with the most power are the people responsible for ending the cycle. That's the way that I view it. I think that this conversation has been very enlightening because I didn't really consider that, like, you know, Zionists are largely comprised of, if you're not talking about like ideologically driven Protestants in the United States, Zionism is largely driven by trauma from Jewish history. Right? Like they're terrified of becoming a minority in yet another place that's going to subjectify them or like brutally torture them even, like in World War II. So I guess that I have a little bit more empathy for Zionists after this conversation as a result of that. At the same time, I don't think that takes away the responsibility of Israel to be the ones to pull out and put an end, like once and for all, say, we're putting an end to this. And if they try to retaliate, we are simply going to defend and not push back. To wrap this all back around to Hasan, I think that that's what he wants too. I think that that's what any reasonable person would want. They just want the violence over there to stop, right? And so I am trying to get to the most realistic and reasonable conclusion that there is to make this violence stop. And I think it has to start with Israel. And I think Hasan thinks the same thing. And so I don't think that what he's doing or saying is directed at anything besides getting the violence over there to stop. I think that's what he wants. And I think that's what you want and what I want too. We should all be on the same page in that regard.
Do you want me to, sorry, you said you had to go. Do you want me to do a response to that? And then
real quick response. Then I got to hop off. Somebody else is waiting.
That word quick's doing heavy lifting. Okay, shit. If we're going to talk about Hasan, listen, okay, that's a separate conversation. Hasan supports Houthis and Hezbollah, okay? He supports the organization that Hezbollah helped Assad literally kill more Arabs than Israel has ever done in their entire history combined. So even if you include Gaza, actually. No, that guy. Anyway, that's not, if you want peace, that's a really stupid way to pursue peace. As for I'll give you one big olive branch, and then I'll tell you why I disagree with everything else.
Sure.
I completely agree that people overstate Israel's willingness and appetite for a peaceful solution, even if I think two states. To be clear, two states to me is the only. If you want Palestinians to have a state tomorrow and not in 50 years, it's two states or nothing. That's it. That's the only feasible one. I think people overstate Israel's willingness and appetite for that. I think in the entire 100-odd years of Zionism, they've basically been willing to accept two states maybe 3 times, and every other period they've just been like, no, fuck that. We're taking all of it, or we're just status quo, like Netanyahu. They do have a responsibility, and they should get Netanyahu out and thrown into jail for the rest of his life. He should off. But I don't believe that this idea of putting the entire responsibility for change or the first move from Israel just because they have more power, I don't think that makes sense. The problem is that, for one, Israel has done unilateral withdrawals in the past. They have not worked. Even they haven't worked in Lebanon. They haven't worked in Gaza. And I don't think it's just because I have a lot of problems with Israeli politics and the way Israelis view the conflict. I don't think I can expect Israel to vote in someone who is going to just leave the West Bank the same way they did Gaza, unilaterally, no talks, nothing. And for that person to ever get in power in elections. Because if you are an Israeli, you are never going to expect anything different from unilaterally leaving the West Bank than another Hamas. Hamas are more popular in the West Bank than they are in Gaza. They have been for a long time now. If Israel leaves the West Bank, it will go to Hamas, and there is literally nothing that will convince an Israeli that they won't just do the same thing with the West Bank, only it's larger territory, it's more strategically placed, they can have hilltops, they can overlook all of Israel's major cities. The Iron Dome can stop most of the rockets. It can't stop the psychological impact of rockets or the few deaths that get caused by it or the destruction. It definitely couldn't stop on October 7th, and it seems that Israel's policy of we just defend completely failed. It completely failed. Israel spent quite a long time with Hamas basically doing the thing where our response is going to be mow the lawn. We're going to take out a few key targets. It'll last a few days. Maybe we'll send some troops in, but then we'll leave and we'll say we've deterred them. Good job, guys. They never deterred them. Hamas were always planning on something that for the last 10 years, it seems they've been planning something like October 7th in some form or another. It's always been in the works according to their own internal talks now, it seems. But I don't think you're ever going to get that without another leader on the other side. The fact is that Palestinians, they did. Lots of groups get in history, unfortunately. And the way that Palestinians can move forward is if they have a leader. They've had people like it in the past. People like Barghouti, I think, were really good examples. They need a leader that is going to stop this fantasy of trying to destroy Israel either through international opinion or through conflict or through international law. I don't think that is a reasonable goal. I don't think it's going to help any Palestinian. It only hurts them. They need a leader that is willing to compromise with Israel and to accept Israel's existence and to accept that they can have their country in the West Bank and Gaza and Israel can have their country in Israel and they can live side by side. They don't need to like each other. They don't need to forgive each other. They don't need anything. They just need to have a state where they don't have IDF soldiers and crazy settlers running around and fucking killing them, and so that they can build their own economy and pursue whichever direction or kind of society that they want to. But it's not happening. You're never getting Israel to concede to it without a Palestinian leader who is there on the other end, who's willing to sit down and talk.
Okay, I'll extend an olive branch to you as well real quick. I think that there are people on the Palestinian side who are going to need to suck it up a little bit. I agree with that. So hopefully one day we can reach that point. I'm just, I'm doing my best to sort through these conflicts as best I can and just understand that no individual thinks that they're the bad guy in these scenarios. And if that's the case, then these groups of people don't think they're the bad guy and so on and so forth. And if none of us are the bad guy, we should all be on the same page. So that's all I'm trying to do is reach that point. And I think that's what we're all trying to do. So that's why I'm not coming at you or nothing, call you a filthy Zionist, whatever. Because I don't think you're a bad person. Like I said, I think most of what you do is very good. I saw that Twitter post you did about, who was it, Piers Morgan on Surrounded?
Yeah, one day you'll get
they,
there.
them thing. The singular they, and then he proceeds to use the singular they, which is very funny. Like I said, we agree on most things, so I'm not out to get you or nothing, but I really appreciate the conversation, and You know, you taught me a lot of stuff. I got a lot of studying to do about Israel and Palestine. I am not nearly as knowledgeable about it as I should be. So I really appreciate you being patient and taking the time to tell me about all this stuff. It means a lot.
Yeah, and also I don't doubt there will be plenty of people in your chat who are going to tell me that I'm wrong about this or that. They're more than welcome to come and tell me why on their own. Or if you have anything you want to bring up later on, you can come and say hi whenever you like, okay?
Absolutely. And I want to do a quick show for Platinum Politics. Is that okay?
Sure.
I appreciate it. Platinum Politics is where the current discussion's taking place. We have a Discord server. I will link it in my chat right now, in all 3 chats. So if you want to come join, you know, you can talk to me about anything, anytime. We can set up a discussion, or I sometimes do 15-minute like flash debates. I'm doing a lot of talks with people. So if you have any kind of disagreements with anything that's been talked about today, you want to come yell at me, you can do that. Platinum Politics is the place to do it. So come join. It's a fun place. Anyway, thanks again, LonerBox. I really appreciate you having me on. It means a lot.
Yeah, nice talking. Take care, man.
Yeah, you as well. Take care. Hi, thanks so much for watching and making it to the end of the video. I just wanted to let you all know that I love and appreciate everybody in my community, whether you can support me financially or just by liking, commenting, and sharing my videos. It helps way more than you know. That being said, I do want to give a very special thanks to my tier 4 subs, which would be Space Timid and Hot Take Andy. And thanks so much to my monetary subscribers from any of the tiered subs, or anybody who gives me money in any form, including going to my Patreon shop, donating money to me directly. It all helps way more than you know. If you do decide to help me financially, you can get some really cool perks like early access to content, exclusive access to censored videos, also some really cool badges next to your name. Even if you can't afford a monetary subscription, just watching, sharing, and commenting on my content helps way more than you know. Thanks again, and I will see you all in the next video.